All right, continuing on with part two of my testimony. I came back up to Indianapolis. I had just come from being homeless and all that, as I had said before, and my best friend from high school had invited me up for his wedding. So I saved up money, $40 I think it was, for a Greyhound ticket, bought myself a Greyhound ticket, and got up to Indianapolis. That was great. It was fun. Then I it kind of surprised me. His father-in-law was a very nice man. He was marrying a young lady who was African, but she had grown up here. She was like second generation. She actually came here when she was very, very little. Her father was an immigrant, and he took a shine to me immediately. He called me, I believe, a likable rogue was his words. He spoke with an Indian accent. He's like, "You're a likable rogue." He said something like that. He's kind of a hard man, but he surprised me when he said that. You know, I still had some bad habits, so I had been smoking a cigarette outside, or I asked him for one or something, and then we just sat and had a discussion. And next thing I know, he knew somebody in town who he introduced me to. This guy owned a landscaping business up by Fishers and Noblesville, where all the rich people are, northern Indianapolis. And he said, you can get a job with him, and he might even give you a place to stay with one of his managers or somebody. He owns houses and things too. He's actually a millionaire. He's made over $1 million, let's say. Not like 2 million, but he had made at least $1 million at one point, and a lot of that was tied up in a lot of business stuff. So it's not like it was free money that he had available to do stuff with. But he might be able to give you a place to stay. He can give you a good job. It'll be hard work though, and you'll be really, really working your butt off to get things done. And I said, sure. Hey, I'm ready. Let's do this. So one of his managers he put me up with, and sure enough, I worked for him for a good two or 3 years. I can't remember at this point. It was for a little bit. It probably like 2 years actually when I think about it. But I worked for him, and I ran a crew of Mexicans at one point. I worked my way up to that because I was responsible. I had a valid license. I could drive with a trailer. I could speak Spanish. All of the rest of them were illegal. I mean, I ended up finding out even the one Mexican there who I thought was legal, I found out later his visa had expired and his license had expired, and he was not driving legally. And it was kind of a shock to find out, but this whole business was pretty much illegal, or run by illegals for slightly cheaper. They were getting decent pay though. It wasn't like he was totally giving them horrible wages or anything. Anyway, interestingly enough, with the current immigration debate and all that, not only these guys, but I met a ton of Mexicans, both in Louisville there, and as well as in Lafayette. And I worked for Wabash National that made trailers in Lafayette, as a little detour for a second. But suffice to say, I have lived with and met many Mexicans in my life up in the U.S., and I can tell you one thing, even in Colorado, when I moved there eventually, I met more. And I can tell you one thing they almost all had in common. They're all hard workers. They're all real nice guys. They all have a family down in Mexico, and they all regularly sent their paychecks and their money back down to Mexico. You can bet. So it's not like they were coming here to help the U.S. economy or anything, or to help us out. I'm not calling them evil people, because, they're trying to help their families. But at the same time, economically, I can vouch for the fact that they're all basically stripping our economy down a bit by doing that. And that's where all their money was going. All of it. Or a great, great big portion of it. The rest was going to Modelo and other kinds of beer and stuff. Like, they just, they lived cheaply. They would get a cheap apartment or house or, flat, some slum somewhere, and then that's how they'd work. Anyway, I got along with all these guys because I spoke good Spanish without an English accent. Anyone up here spoke with an accent. I didn't have an accent, still don't. So my accent actually changed now. They tell me I'm somewhere in between an Ecuadorian and a Mexican accent, because the Ecuadorians speak slower. Mexicans speak real fast, and they have their own slang. Well, I don't speak incredibly fast, but in Spanish anyway, but I picked up on some of the slang and other things, and some of the way they say certain words. So I can kind of get by with multiple groups right now by doing that if I wanted to. I can kind of get along with them. And if they find somebody, interesting tidbit, if you ever meet a Mexican or Hispanic and you speak Spanish pretty well, even if you do have an accent, it's almost like instant friend. If you have no accent, it is instant friend. They're like, oh, paisano, they called me like countryman kind of thing. Like you're one of us basically, which was crazy. No matter which one, and if you wanted, they would give you a beer or whatever they had, they would share it with you because it was just you're one of them all of a sudden, which is interesting. They're very interesting people, and like I said, very hardworking. I have a lot of respect for them in many ways. So, I come back up to get back to my story, my testimony. I come back up. I know God is maybe working in my life or something, but it's not very apparent yet that it's God. It seems like I just got a lucky break or two. And I'm slowly coming back around to a position where I'm in society again. I have a car of my own that I bought with my own money. Several things like that are starting to happen, and I'm really excited about it. I'm really happy and just starting to actually succeed. I'm doing good, honest work, and that was wonderful to get back to all that. And my friend got married. I'm still sticking around Indianapolis, so I get to see him. Just kind of, eventually I found a roommate in an old guy. There was a guy I had worked years before that with in a factory. We had gotten to know each other at this factory, and he's a Mormon, interestingly enough, but I got to know way more about them later on, the Mormons. But I went ahead and called him up, and he goes, it's interesting. I'm coming back to Indy myself. I just got here, just broke up with a girl, kind of a bad situation. I need a place to stay too. And I go, I need a place to stay. Dude, would you be willing to come stay with me, be a roommate at a place? And we could start a business together. I was thinking start a landscaping business because at that point I knew how to do that. So we moved in together at a downtown, very close to downtown Indianapolis, the old women's prison, if anyone knows, Hamilton Avenue. Home of the champions. But anyway, it slowly started to change after that. Horrible place in the city. I couldn't stand it because, you try to sleep, you try to take a nap, and there's someone with the subwoofer thumping going by, and that always irked me. My brothers and I have kind of deduced, we've taken some online tests and other things. We've never been formally diagnosed, but we believe we're all autistic or on the spectrum somewhere because we all display some of those OCDs and some of those proclivities for things, but some of the things that really irk us, that really bother us, it's obvious normal people aren't bothered by this. Loud, not just loud noises, but persistent noises, very specific frequencies of noises, textures, all kinds of things like that are just very specific, and you don't know. I mean, normal people have no idea. We call them normies, really, but have no idea why this would make someone upset, because for most people it doesn't. But for us, there's certain things like that do, certain flavors, etc. And we weren't spoiled as children. We were very well disciplined, very strictly disciplined, I would say. As a matter of fact, compared to most people, we got spanked regularly and whatnot. We were just, my parents were on top of it. They didn't skip out on anything. So we're there. We start the business. And then we find out I started to invest in, because we did someone needed a painting job done. So we did a painting job. And then I realized this is way easier, not as hard, not as backbreaking as doing landscaping work, mulch and all that stuff. Plus, I didn't have all the equipment to do all that. I was going to have to build up from the ground. I had quit my other job and started this one, and I was able to do it. And it was great, but it just took some time, and it was that's what we were building up to. Well, then we realized, both of us look at each other and we're like, we should just make it a painting business. So we did. We made a logo, we got our business license, all that stuff, and we started making better money off of painting. And we were doing a good job, doing quality work. We learned a ton about business, about painting, etc. And it all went really well for a little, really smooth. And then my youngest brother, he was over in Georgia, across the country. My family, at that point, the rest of them had moved on. My the older of my two younger brothers, the older one, had moved on. He had gone to college down in Florida, and then he actually ended up moving out to Colorado, and that's where he was. He had been going to a little church there, Baptist church over in Colorado, Grand Junction, and I don't remember the town that my younger brother was in Georgia, but he was there by himself. He was renting a house, a small one-story house, I think 1 bedroom or something, very small house. And he played piano really well, still does. And he had his own piano and everything. He just had his own little setup there, and everything was great for him. He was attending his own little church there. I wasn't going to church at this point, but I was slowly warming up to that idea again. So my younger brother, I called him up, and I just, on a whim, I said, hey, here's what we're doing. We're starting a business. We have started a business, painting, etc. Would you be willing to come and work with me in this business and help us out and be another helper, as well as, we're going to get something going. And you might have better opportunity here than you do currently in Atlanta, to get married, to whatever you want to do, job-wise, etc. Because he wasn't really doing anything over there. So he thought about it, and I thought he was going to say no, because he hadn't talked to me in a while. I was kind of the black sheep of our family. And so, to my great surprise, he said yes. So he packed up all his stuff, and he came across country. And he came there, and I was just floored. I was beside myself. I was in tears, Lord, thank you so much that my brother came to help me and to be with me. So we did. We started going to town on the business and whatnot. Slowly, during that time, those years, he started to get me back into, start talking about the Bible, discussing the Bible. And over the course of the first year, he wanted to find a good church. And I remember that. We couldn't find a good one to settle on. We found a bunch of funny ones. There was one called the Breakfast Church, even, that sticks out to me because they serve breakfast, because they broke bread together in the Bible, the early church. So this church they were focused around having a meal together. They all had a meal together. And that's how that was part of their fellowship, which I found really interesting. But we never ended up going there. I mean, we didn't even visit there, I think. Anyway, so I don't care about mentioning names of churches. The names of my family and stuff, I don't really want to go terribly into that and just bring drag all their stuff out. I asked my one brother who lives here with me now if it would be okay, and he gave his permission that it would be fine to share the stuff about our story. So I'm doing that because this is partly his testimony too, gotta say. Anyway, so younger brother moves in. Roommate, through a long series of events, realized he needed to move out. Like we realized he needed to move out because he was not one of us, so to speak. He was Mormon, didn't want to have anything to do with Christianity, was a very nice guy, very polite and whatnot, but had some horrible habits. He smoked a lot, left ash everywhere in his room, on the floor, etc. There's a lot of stuff we didn't like about him, but also he just ultimately, I realized I wanted to start coming back to God. So me and my younger brother, we had some good conversations about it. I ended up kind of getting serious with the other guy, and we kind of kicked him out. We had agreed for him to move out, and then when the date came around, he didn't move out and didn't give any excuse or anything. Or he gave an excuse, we gave him a little extra time, and then he still wasn't doing it. So I finally stood up to him a little more, and he kind of quickened his pace and got out of there. And then it was just me and my younger brother. Then we start talking about all kinds of biblical stuff. He had studied the Bible a lot. He had read his Bible a lot, just meticulously, being an Aspie, autistic. That's short for Asperger's. It was one of those things we found online that somebody called, and I think it was on Reddit or somewhere. Somebody called autistic people Aspies, and it kind of stuck. We liked it as well as a lot of people online liked it, so we started calling each other Aspies. Anyway, so because of that, he meticulously had gone over his Bible a lot and had discovered a lot of things in there. We bonded over that because I started to say, a lot of these things the Baptists have said, now that I'm starting to read my Bible again, and I wasn't going back to church yet, but I said, well, as I'm reading it, there's a lot of stuff in here that seems to contradict or is not the same necessarily as what I remember them preaching or teaching us. And one of those is the pre-tribulational rapture. And he on his own had come to that same conclusion. He was like, the pre-tribulational rapture is not real. Now, I could do a whole nother separate video on why that is. But the passages, in general, Jesus pretty much lays it out in Matthew 24, very specific about his events and what's going to happen, what's the order of events and operations. And then he says, after all that, he's going to come. Well, in Revelation, there's signs about that. There are things I'm reading the book of Acts right now, but the old prophets, you add up all the things. I just kept reading through the Bible over and over and over. I had a King James, and that's all I was doing, is just reading through my Bible. And eventually that kind of led me to the conclusion, like, it seems like the day of the Lord is all one event. So I don't see anywhere in here. You have to kind of take some verses out of context and then put them together separately in order to come up with that idea. We started looking into it. There's a man named John Darby who really proliferated the idea of the pre-tribulational rapture. And if he had not done that, I don't think it would be so popular today. He didn't come up with it, but he wasn't the first, but he took the idea and he definitely spread it. And if you look into him, John Darby, his contemporaries and the people around him they didn't respect him at all, and they didn't believe that. And that was never the common held belief until, I think, a couple hundred years ago. Not even a couple hundred. It was like 100 years ago or something, maybe even a little slightly more than that. But around the time he was preaching that's when it came into popularity. Before that, Christians actually didn't hold to that belief. It's fairly new. That for anyone who doesn't know, the pre-tribulational rapture is the belief that Jesus is going to come back before the tribulation, before anything happens, just like in the movie Left Behind or Thief in the Night, if you're older, or one of those. And he's going to just swoop, all the Christians are going to disappear in one fell swoop. They're just going to be gone, and everybody else is going to be like, where'd they go? And they're going to explain it with like aliens or something weird like that. And the Antichrist is going to take the scene, and he's going to just come up on the scene and take the throne and all this stuff. Anyway, that's how they explain it. I don't see that in the Word of God. Really don't. I mean, I can break it down, but maybe I'll do that in a future video. I'm not planning on making a bunch of videos. The purpose of all this is just to put it out there for anybody who might see it, who actually is interested. Anyway, so I continued on in my spiritual journey. My brother, we were both coming back to the Lord in some ways, because he had kind of slacked off a bit, but he hadn't rebelled or anything. He just kind of, wasn't sure about going to church, and we wanted to find a good one, etc. My parents finally suggested a good one called Burge Terrace. So we went there, Baptist church. And so we started to go there. Everybody's real nice. That was great. So we were there, and it was wonderful. But then, about 2 years in, while all this is happening, we were continuously. I think I was there at that church for about 2 years, maybe 3. I can't remember exactly. Again, the timeline gets a little fuzzy because I didn't keep track of the time, and why would I? But my other brother, well, before I get to that, so my younger brother and I, we're sitting there at the house, and we keep discussing all this stuff. And one of the things we started discussing was, hey, we're seeing spiritual gifts in here. We're seeing, John says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day. Philip was taken away. He was taken by the Holy Spirit somewhere. John said, I was taken up to the third heaven. Or not John, sorry, Paul said that he was taken up to the third heaven. There are so many accounts of these kinds of things in the New Testament, and the daughters of Cornelius, they prophesied. There's so many of these things. And then you look at Acts 2 specifically, and in Acts 2, he goes on to quote Joel and says, this is the fulfillment of the prophet Joel. When they're speaking in tongues, when they get the Holy Spirit, he said, this is the fulfillment of that in the last days, I will pour out my Spirit upon all people, and sons and daughters will prophesy, and your young men will have visions, your old men will dream dreams, etc. And I was like, we're not seeing any of this. I don't see anybody doing this. I don't see anybody online who's genuine, because if so, you'd think the world would hear about it. The internet connects us all now. There's videos, there's YouTube. What's going on? There's nobody like that who's alive. Well, we started looking, but we started to think about it too. How could John be in the Spirit on the Lord's Day? It seems like something he could do almost at will. He figured out how to do it, or to pray and get there, or meditate or something. So I looked into all kinds of stuff. Now, I had done a lot of drugs in the past, a lot of different ones that I had tried. I didn't like stuff like, cocaine. I think there was one time in my life that I tried meth, but that was during my heroin years. The cocaine, same thing. There was like 2, maybe 3 times when I tried it. Didn't care for all that stuff because it's what they call uppers, and it gets you anxious. There's anxiety, butterflies in the stomach, and people get all paranoid on it. And so I just didn't like that. And I was like, this is just stupid. Why would you do this? I was more about stuff like, heroin was the much, much stronger version of a downer, something that kind of, the way I described it to someone once was, it's like if you've had a really, really rough day and you got fired from your job and all kinds of stuff, and you're like about to cry, and you sit down and you have an older brother, and you sit down on the steps at your house or something, and you have an older brother who comes and he puts his arm around you and just gives you security and peace, and you just feel really good. That's what heroin felt like to me. Eventually, that's what it came to feel like. It wasn't like that at the very beginning, but it wasn't bad. It was just interesting. Eventually, that's what it came to feel like. So it took me a long time to get free of that. But as soon as my girlfriend left me, I realized it was all about her later on. I was like, that's the only reason I kept doing it, was because I was with her. And I'm glad, thank God, that I was able to get off of it, because so many people can't. I'm pretty sure she's still doing it to this day. So we start looking for methods to do this. And we're like, what is against God? What would be a sin to do, et cetera, et cetera. We start questioning all these things. And eventually we arrive at, I started trying things like lucid dreaming, where you record your dreams and you try and wake yourself up at certain times so that your sleep state, your REM state and all that changes, and you're able to go into dreams more often and remember them better and write them down, and you kind of give your brain a signal, I want to remember my dreams, which then eventually that leads into, you can control your dreams. You can get into a dream and you can fly, or whatever you want to do. You can do it in your dreams. And there's a lot of people who can do this very easily. But I thought, is that what he did, more or less? Is that what he was doing? Did he sit and meditate for a while he was awake and then got there? I tried that. I tried all kinds of stuff. Eventually, I talked to my brother about something that I had only tried a handful of times way, way earlier, before the heroin, before all that, when I was dealing weed at that place. Hippies tend to do certain drugs, and they smoke a lot of weed, a lot of marijuana, but one of the things they do is also psychedelics. They love mushrooms, especially at music festivals and stuff, mushrooms and LSD, acid. And I did acid like once. I tried it, or what they told me was it, and then later someone was like, oh no, it was 2CI, or one of those lab created things that's supposed to be like it. But I had also tried mushrooms a few times, and I was like, these are 100% natural. These grow out of the ground. God made these, because I don't believe that any plant, according to the Bible, God made everything. And I don't believe Satan created any of the plants in our world and put them here to tempt us. Obviously, God cut off the things that were expressly forbidden in the Bible, like the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of eternal life. Well, especially the tree of eternal life. Those were in the Garden of Eden, and that was cut off. And there was an angel set there, as it says in Genesis, that was set there to guard the way. And he had a sword, and he was guarding the way. You can't get back in there. Adam and Eve could not get back into the garden once they got out, once they were cast out. So access to some of that stuff is just completely off the table. Well, I knew I believed the Bible, so I was like, okay. And I had a lot of questions. So I asked some of these questions at the church, but those people, the Baptists and whatnot, they're not very open to talking about certain things. The widely held view, especially about psychedelics and whatnot, is that they're bad. They're just evil right off the bat. And you just can't, like, if you're doing that, you're trying to commune with demons, essentially, is what most people think. And that you are seeking to go around God. You're trying to do something and get into somewhere you're not supposed to. So therefore, it's evil. It's bad. It's wrong. Even though most of them don't know anything about it. So I decided to try it again. And so I looked for some, couldn't find any. I would have to go meet a bunch more people, smoke a bunch more weed, and buy a bunch more drugs to find the people, or go to a music festival or something to find people who had them. And even then, that's a one-time thing. You can't expect to get them regularly that way. you'd have to get a big amount. And then if you had a big amount, you'd have to parcel it out correctly. Plus, the times that I had gotten them in the past, I ended up finding out later. I started growing my own, basically. I ordered spores online, and I figured out the whole process and started growing my own for our own personal supply, so that I knew that they were pure and nothing had been done to them. And I found, like, from what I found out from the growing process, the people who had sold me mushrooms before, they had mushrooms, but there was a clump of something on the bottom of the mushroom. And I found out later on they did that for the weight purposes. They sell you the mushrooms, but if they pull it off of the cake that it was grown on, so to speak, because it grows on a cake of grain or straw or whatever you use, when you do that, if you pull part of that cake off with it, that adds to the weight. So then you can sell that. But if someone eats that, they'll probably get sick. I mean, they might not get sick, but it's not good for you for sure to be eating the stuff that it grew on. It's not the same thing. It's kind of a way of cheating people. So then I found out, like, oh, no. They can grow actually good and healthy and not look so stringy and whatever, and you can do it correctly. So I started to do that. And my brother and I started discussing it, and he said, yeah, I've looked into those before. You know what? Let's start to try them a little bit. So we looked it up in the Bible. We were looking at, what's God's stance on this and what are the standards in the Bible. Genesis 2 says that we have all foods, or all plants have been given, all plants bearing seed have been given for meat, it says. Now, I'll get to the meat thing in a second. That means all plants. All plants are under the dominion of mankind as long as they bear seed. I don't know which ones don't bear seed. I'd have to go find out. But mushroom has a seed. It has spores, which you could say are the seed because those fall in the wild and they grow. So I said, okay, that falls under this category. God made it. I don't believe everything was just cursed by sin and changed, and then some plants got it worse than others. That doesn't make any sense. That makes no sense, and the Bible says nothing about that. So why would that be the case? So under these assumptions, we went forward with it, and we looked up some other stuff too. Like, okay, we're not going to go around broadcasting it because we don't want to make our brothers stumble, like it says in the New Testament. We also want to, we want to be responsible with it. We're not doing it just for fun. We're doing it to try and seek after God, and we want to try and do it properly, etc. Like all these things. So we started growing some, and once they did grow, maybe 3-4 times we did mushrooms. We did them. We were thinking, okay, we'll do them once a month, and that's what we did. We picked a day on the month. We worked our way up to it and everything, and then on that day we would do it. And we would eat some, for context, and this is, I know, rabbit trails like crazy, but it's relevant to the story. The amounts, a dosage scale for mushrooms, they have what they call microdosing, which is less than 1 gram. If you take roughly less than 1 gram of mushrooms, then less than half a gram usually is about the amount for microdosing, and probably like 0.16 or something grams. But that's the equivalent of getting a good boost out of your coffee. Basically, you get a little bit of an energy boost, you get a creativity boost, but you don't feel any physical effects, you don't feel anything else. You just kind of you might get a slight mood boost, but it's very slight. It's barely noticeable, and that's the point of microdosing. And there are actual basketball players and people who have said they've done this, and this helped their percentages with their shots. They made more of their shots in basketball. They scored more, etc. There's a lot of people who've done experiments with this, and it's come out positively. They've been able to do more. Musicians obviously take advantage of this kind of stuff. So anyway, that's kind of where we started, was with a small amount, but not that small. I think we started with about 3 grams, because 2 or 3 grams is where you start to feel it more, and you can call it, the secular crowd calls it a trip. Now, a good regular trip, average trip, is between, like, in my opinion, it's like 3 to 3.5 grams is a decent, like, okay, you had a mushroom trip. And that's like standard. A little less than that is a weak mushroom trip. But so anywhere between 1 gram and 2.5 is like kind of a weak trip, depending. And all this is relative because mushrooms contain varying amounts of psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in them. But so it's not 100% every time, but it's rough estimate. Then after that, there was a man named Terence McKenna, secular guy. I don't think he was an atheist, but definitely not a Christian, and very wrong about a lot of stuff. He did a lot of mushrooms, and a lot of people in that community look up to him. So on the dosage scale, the next one up was 5 grams. When you get up to 5 grams, he said that is what he called a heroic dose. If you do those by yourself, alone in the dark, then you've really done mushrooms and you've really experienced it. You've experienced that, and you've learned a lot more about yourself. You've been brutally honest with yourself, and you've kind of had the fullness of the experience. Well, then after that, I don't know what to call the next dosage, but 7 grams is like the next step up. That's like the next level, so to speak. And at 7 grams is where I decided way ahead of time, like, okay, we're going to slowly work our way up. And when we reach 7 grams, that's when we stop. And if we haven't, if nothing's happened by then, we haven't gotten into the spirit or anything, then that's it. We might do this a little bit more, but we're not going to be looking for that to happen. So yeah, that's the dosage scale. We started to do mushrooms, and that's where I'm going to stop part 2.